All right, be the market expert. And so I wanted to kick it off with Resi Club Analytics. And so the top article just says this interactive housing market map shows where sellers and buyers have the most power right now. So we scroll down and it shows like according to Zillow, right? And so it's subjective, it's based off of different criteria. And yet if we look at this, it says if it's above 70, strong sellers market. 55 to 69 sellers. We have a neutral 44 to 55, 28 to 44 buyer, and then strong buyer's market if we are below 27. So the very first graph that it shows is this just national. They're saying based off of all the national data, right, that we are just slightly above a neutral and we are still in a seller's market. I mean, like the toes dipping in the water here. And so the higher score indicates a higher national aggregate in the US market where the sellers have more power. A lower score indicates a cooler or a colder nationally aggregated US housing market where buyers have more power. Okay, cool. So we're looking at this thing and it's saying that we're still in a seller's market. You can kind of see like as we go through here, last time we were really in a neutral market, we have March of 2020. Okay, we all understand that. Back in between March of 18 and 19. So we haven't been in a buyer's market in a very long time now. I think we need to keep in mind that as we're looking at this, the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that this is based off of all markets, right? So as we're basing this off of all markets, I think that the big thing to keep in mind is that this doesn't necessarily equate to Colorado. So we go through, it says that it rates the housing market about a 55. And so it's saying you're 55, it's a neutral market, right? Like literally, toe is almost in buyer's market. And if we scroll down to Colorado, here we are. And you can see that we are just slightly, right? We're in that orange. We're still in the seller's market. They're saying, like, hey, based off of everything that we're seeing, you are in a cooler seller's market. And then when we get down a little bit further south, or if you get into eastern Colorado, or I'm sorry, western Colorado, you can see that it is going into more of their buyer's market. Cool. All right. So I don't think this comes to us a surprise to anybody on this call. But if we were to look through this, it says among the 250 largest metro housing areas, the 10 top hottest, right? We got New York, New York, New York, Connecticut, West Virginia, New York, New Hampshire. We have Michigan, New York, and Massachusetts. Well, if we're looking at this does make sense, right? We're talking about these populations. This is where we saw the population moving to once we started getting out of this digital nomad age, right? Remember when we started seeing people being able to move all across the United States and they were able to keep their job, go to a lower cost of living, like this is pretty much the area to which they were moving into, right? They were going in here and you can see that, well, this is cooled off. This is now into a neutral market. And over the last year, we've seen more people move over here. These are the hottest markets. Okay, so we're seeing that. And then when we go through, it says the coolest Tennessee, Mississippi, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Florida, 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 Florida. Cool. Like we understand this. Like this is where we saw a lot of movement happening. We saw a lot of builders start building and they were going to capitalize on the new gold rush and interest rates happen. Like interest rates happen, made people go crazy and we're going buying houses. And then the pendulum swung and interest rates went the other way. And now people are like, pump the brakes. So we're looking at this. I think this all makes sense to everybody on this call. So here's your heat index again. It says the sellers have more power, and we look in here again. Sellers have power. We get that, and we're looking at this thing, and we're saying that they're saying that like there's some pretty big areas up here in the Denver metro, and that's truly where we're seeing stuff. And again, there are pockets, right? So we're seeing pockets. This isn't anything different to us. Now, if we were to look at their monthly total US existing home sales, we scroll down here, 315,000 in March. And there's no seasonal adjustment that's associated with this. And it says in March 2025, US homes were running at 4 million seasonally adjusted. And meanwhile, we've maintained the current existing home sales pace. Okay, so we're looking at this. Let's fast forward a little bit further. Here it is. I think this graph makes a little bit more sense. Using existing home sales for the United States, right here we are, and we can see that we are fairly low in 2025 with homes coming in and off the market nationally speaking. So I thought this was just an interesting graph to look at. I think that if we were to go and play with this, what's going to determine what the rest of the pace is going to be is over the next month, right? We're getting into the spring season, right? We know that historically speaking, real estate is very, very seasonal. We have a hot market and we have a cooler market depending on the season that we are in. And so it has been a little bit cooler than we've expected it to, nationally speaking. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next month as things start to warm up and heat up, both figuratively and literally inside of our industry. Want to shift gears into this is just market information that I think it's important for our industry. And so this came out, this is a fairly new article. It says the war over private listings has cost Compass listings and agents. All right, so we've been talking about this, right? We're not gonna shy away from these conversations, but I think these conversations are important inside of our four walls. You guys are part of the largest real estate brokerage in the world, and we have stayed neutral as far as a company goes when it comes to clear cooperation, right? CCP. When we see the acronym CCP, this is clear cooperation policy. This is a NAR. This is a realtor policy. Well, what happened here, right? We've seen Compass making some waves recently. We saw Compass go out and they said, listen, we want to be able to market our listings exclusively to our agents, and it is going to be a win for our clients. And that was the stance they took, right? They said, you know what, if we cut out KW, the largest brokerage in the world, we cut out EXP, cut out Coldwell, we cut out Remax, our agents and our clients will win. Like that was the stance that they took. Well, this Northwest MLS, and this is in Washington, Washington's MLS has bylaws that say you cannot withhold listings from the MLS in their bylaws. And so Compass and them have been exchanging for months now since last year. And they've been going back and forth saying, hey, we want you to change this policy. That's Compass's stance. We want you to change this policy. And the Northwest MLS, which is not a realtor owned MLS, right? Like Colorado, we don't have a realtor owned MLS inside of RE Colorado. It's a private company. Well, this is a real estate agent owned MLS out in the Northwest MLS. So real estate agents own this MLS, and their bylaws, they've just been saying, nope, sorry, we are not going to change our bylaws. And they kicked Compass out of their MLS because they've been running private listings. So they said, hey, look, we broke our bylaws, you're gone. So we now have Compass that is going through and they are now suing this MLS. It says the new complaint has detailed glimpse into how both parties ended up in the conflict. In the first place, the situation began. The complaint rose when Compass first asked the MLS to change the rule back in July of 2024. This change would allow Compass to market private listings in Washington the way it does in other states. But in February, they declined to make the change. It says in response, Compass pivoted to looking at the rules that it could interpret in the ways that would allow it to do so. Well, we fast forward a little bit further, and now it's going out and saying this conflict is taking place in the single state. It is a case study in tensions over private listings. Compass began publicly leaning into the concept last year and has been open about the desire to build its own listing network. So there's the complaint. But if we look at this thing, this is going to get very interesting. I was talking to the leadership team yesterday about this. What we've seen publicly from Zillow and some other companies like Zillow and Redfin, two large aggregates of pushing out data, have both said if you put a home on the market first as a private exclusive, we are not going to take that information and push it out to our people if you fail. Like that's Zillow's and Redfin's stance right now. Two of the largest platforms that your consumers go to look for housing. And they have said, look at you guys put it on your platform, rock and roll. But if it fails, don't look at us because we're not gonna market your property at that point anymore. Well, this MLS took it one step further and they said, good luck, guys. None of your listings are now on our MLS. So we're going to see what this thing looks like. And, if the MLS wins, which who knows? We have no clue. We have no clue if the MLS will win. I mean, it's literally in their bylaws. Everyone participates in it. You don't have to go to the MLS, which is what Compass is saying. Like, we don't have to go to the MLS if we don't want to. And the MLS said, cool, we don't want you in our MLS anymore if you're not going to play by the rules. And now Compass is saying, no, 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 no. That's not what we asked for. And so we'll see how this thing continues to play out. But I think it's going to set huge precedents going forward. Want to shift gears because I saw this and I think it's important. Foreclosure auctions rise in Q1 after VA moratoriums expire. All right, so back in COVID, we saw displacement with people in jobs, and we saw the government step in and say, "Hey, government loans, no need to pay them back." We saw this across the spectrum on a lot of things, right? We saw this on school and housing. I think those are the two biggest ones, right? School and housing. Well, so this has come through, and this says foreclosure auction activity across the U.S. rose to a 6-quarter high during the first 3 months of 2025. So we're rearview facing data. We're looking back into last quarter. And it says this was a surge in properties that hit the market after the expiration of the post-pandemic protections, according to auctions.com. If you look at this thing, it says completed foreclosure auctions were up 20% from the previous quarter and up 4% from a year earlier. And then it says scheduled foreclosure auctions, a leading indicator of future completions, also rose 14%. Activity increased across loan types, expected those backed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA, and VA. They saw the sharpest jump with auction volume more than doubling year over year. All right, cool. So we're looking at this thing and it's going through, and we can scroll down here, and here's Q1 2025 foreclosure auction volume annual change. It's saying Colorado we've seen 59%. 59%. Now, I think what's interesting, and when I say interesting, I say, let's go with misleading. So, because it goes foreclosure auction volume above pre-pandemic levels. Okay, so now we're saying it's 59% over last year, annual change. And we're saying in the next line, it says that we have volumes above pre-pandemic levels. Well, here's what's interesting. The data is very, very low to begin with. Like, this is such low bars that we're talking about here that this is not going to significantly move the needle one way or the other. And what I want to talk about when we look at this, because I do want you guys to know this, if you were to see this graph outside anywhere else, or you hear your consumer having a conversation, the next conversation that we need to have is these zombie foreclosures. All right, like that's the very next conversation. When someone starts mentioning that we are in a foreclosure auction environment, the very next conversation that we should be having with them is zombie foreclosures. And I want you to look at, like, you got this picture. I want you to think about this picture. Not this one. That one's from The Walking Dead. That's not a zombie foreclosure. That's just The Walking Dead. But I want you to think about this one. I don't know what the Christian Science monitor is, but obviously something about foreclosures. And so let's go here. Let's look at the highlights. So we're Investopedia. The zombie foreclosures is an abandonment of property by homeowners who have defaulted on their mortgages, received a foreclosure notice, and maybe, I'm going to put maybe in here, I'm going to insert maybe, mistakenly believed that they needed to vacate the premises. The homeowner continues to hold the title to the property and is responsible for its upkeep until the foreclosure process has been completed. A zombie foreclosure can create problems for an entire neighborhood because a vacant, unattended house can lower property values. And here we are during the 2008 financial crisis that severely impacted the housing market. Zombie properties were widespread across the United States. This is important. And when we're looking at this is the conversation that I think that we need to be having when a client brings up this information. Just because a home is in the foreclosure process, firstly, doesn't mean it's going to be foreclosed upon. Secondly, it also does not mean that it is going to be sold at a steal of a deal. I would say that most of these people, especially when we are talking about how we have gotten into this, because this is what's important, they're saying the reason why we have gotten into this is because people haven't paid their bills. And so when we think about people not paying their bills, that does not necessarily mean that there is less demand for the house. It just means that they've been behind on their bills. They're going to fire off an acceleration clause that says that, hey, we want our money. And if you can't pay, it's okay. We'll just take the house from you and we will sell it. That's what a foreclosure is. Zombie foreclosures is what we need to be thinking about when we start thinking about the 2008 crisis that we were in with real estate. What we had was people were going out and they were buying properties that they were not qualified to purchase. And this was at such an extreme level all the way across the United States that the market was flooded with real estate. And what happened was the volume went down, or the amount of houses went up so quickly onto the market that the real estate was dropping in value. And you had homes that started looking like this. You had homes that started looking like this. They were zombie foreclosures. No one was in these homes. And since no one was in these homes, and what was happening was people were getting 2, 3, 4 mortgages because they just did the test where they held up the mirror, and if you could fog it, they gave you money to go buy a house. That's not where we are today. That is not the world that we are living in. And so I think that as we're having conversations with our consumers, with other real estate agents, whatever that may look like, and we start talking about the rising foreclosure auction volume, we have to keep in mind that that does not mean that there's going to be great deals out there for people to go run around and purchase, because this is not 2008. And if anyone was buying a house back in 2008, you remember, right? You remember walking into these houses with broken windows. You remember walking into these houses where the inside of the houses were spray painted. I'm talking about in Arvada. I remember this is when I bought a home. I remember buying my first home in 2008. And we went and looked at houses where there was obviously people that were sleeping in them. There was candles. There was no electricity. There was things missing. That's not where we are today. And so I think this is a very dangerous article that might get some conversations. And this is where you need to be able to live, talking about just because we're seeing foreclosures go up due to VA and USDA loans, that does not mean that we are going to see a significant drop in home values to where there's going to be some kind of gold rush for investors or anybody at this point. And honestly, if you kind of went through and you kind of played with this even a little bit more, they also talk about how the gap between buyers' offers and sellers' expectations still remain stable for foreclosure auctions, but narrowed for REO. With foreclosure auctions, the spread held at 7 percentage points. Before then doubled the 3-point spread seen a year ago. So if we were to look at this, we're not seeing huge flash sales. We're still seeing buyers expect to pay X and sellers believe Y. And depending on the situation they're in, is if a deal is going to be had. So let's fast forward and let's look at Logan Motoshami. And so this is from April 26th. We're looking at rear view facing data. We're not going to talk about 10-year yields. But it says, since President Trump's Liberation Day on April 2nd, mortgage rates, the 10-year yield, and mortgage spreads have been on a wild ride. We know that. We talk about this every week. And it says, it's been so wild that the low end of his 10-year yield forecast range between 3.8 and 4.7 for 2025 was almost officially met. However, last week, mortgage rates in the 10-year yield slowly moved lower as this week progressed. But can this last? And again, this is all it is. Like, this is literally, there's no crystal ball in what 2025, probably through the next 4 years, are going to hold for us. And while it matters to us the most because we deal in the highest ticketed price item that most Americans purchase in their lifetime, that's why we talk about it. So if we look, let's go down. Firstly, purchase application data. It says, given the recent rise in mortgage rates, he expected a more pronounced decline in the week-to-week and year-over-year figures of purchase application. And here's your illustration. Guys, and while it has lowered the amount of people rushing out from previous weeks, we still have more demand in 2025 than we did in 2024, right? So as we're looking at this, this can be deceiving. And this is my word that I got tripped up on last week. And I'm just picturing Rachel texting me right now. And when we look at this, guys, we still have more people last week raising their hand saying, I am interested in figuring out what I qualify for over last year. And yes, it's lower than what it was 3 weeks ago, but yet there is still more demand than what we had in 2024. And so when we're doing this, this is why this is important. You have consumers that are in your ecosystem that you might have not had a conversation with, that is finally jumping off the fence and saying, this is the year that I pursue purchasing a home. I've been promised an Airbnb bust. I've been promised a silver tsunami. I've been promised the housing market crash and lower interest rates, and none of them have come to fruition. And a life event has taken place in their life that is having them look into buying a house. Maybe their landlord is kicking them out, right? And think about that, especially in Colorado, we are a very tenant protected state here, to where we will see landlords sell more properties, kick out tenants, and tenants might say, well, maybe now's the time to go buy a house. We're going to see life events happen, whether people are getting married, people are getting divorced, people are having children, children are going off to school, people are having babies, right? Like all this stuff, deployment, all this stuff is happening. And it's causing people to go look to see what they qualify for a new home. Guys, look at this. This is more than what we were last year. You can see that there's only 5 negative prints and 3 flat prints if we were to go across. But again, we have 7 positive and we are still above where we were last year. Let's make sure that we're going out and having conversations with our people. If we look at trending, right? So what we have is we have this trending pending sales for total homes. And if we were to go across here, we are in line with 2024 with where we are, right? 398,000 homes, right? We're 700 more. But yet, if we look at this, we're on track to where we were last year, but this is where it gets interesting. Let's look at our national single family inventory. And we talked about this, right? We've been having conversations around this specifically where we're like, we are going to cross this 2020 data line. And it's going to happen actually probably sooner than I was calling it for. But if we look at this line is going to intersect and we are going to have more inventory on the market than we did in 2020, even when weird stuff was happening with rates and houses were sitting. So if we look at this, our next goal is 2019. I actually don't think that we're going to probably get there this year. I mean, it might be close, but I doubt it. So we have 31% more inventory on the market as a nation right now than we did last year. And what that's leading to, well, let's jump all the way down, is it goes to the price reductions. So if we look at the price reductions, we can actually see price percentage for price cuts is at 35%. So we go back and look at this thing, we have 31% more homes on the market. And we're seeing 35% of all homes take a price cut. And this doesn't surprise any of us, right? No one on this call is surprised by that information. There's more competition for sellers, more homes are coming on the market. And so now, while you might have been the only home on your neighborhood, well, now you have competition. So when we look at this thing, the principle of substitution, says, I'm not going to go spend more money for the same product. I'm going to go get the product somewhere cheaper. And if that's my ideal neighborhood, and I got two houses to choose from, they're both 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 3,000 square foot house, 3-car garage, I'm going to choose the cheaper one. So we are going to see more homes take price cuts with more inventory hitting the market. What's interesting about that, though, is we know historically speaking, 1/3 of all homes takes a price decrease every year. We're at 35%. We're just a little bit north of a third. And so even with all of the inventory flooding the market, only 1/3 of all homes are still taking a price decrease. Then we go through here, we look at new listings, right? So new listings data, we are this dark red line, and we did see it come down a little bit. Why we will see stuff like this again is because what we do know is this. Most sellers historically become buyers, right? They sell their home and they go buy a house. We know this. And so with interest rates doing some weird stuff, it creates some uncertainty for sellers slash buyers. Buyers just coming in off the streets, right? Maybe out of their parents' basement, right? They got their avocado toast in their hand and they're like, I'm gonna go buy a house. Well, those guys, they're just going in there figuring out what they can afford and they're gonna go for it. They're not putting any inventory back on the board, if you will, right? But when we start talking about millennials and we start talking about Gen Z, these guys are not selling houses for the most part. I mean, there's a few of them, there's a small handful of them. And yet, what we do know is these guys are coming into some money now. And the American dream is not dead. We have an affordability issue, absolutely. And yet these people are going to the bank, right? We saw purchase application data. While it's coming down from the all-time high of 2025, it's still more than what it was in 2024. How many of these people are not putting inventory back on the board, yet they're getting qualified to go buy a house? So when we go through there, and we're going through and we're looking at this thing, this is where this stuff is important. So your new listing data is, yes, it has come down to where we haven't thrown more new listings, but there's still plenty of inventory on the board. We just talked about price cut percentage. And here is, I think, another interesting graph that we should be looking at. So when we're checking out this data right here, and we are truly talking about jobless claims. Remember, this was a huge topic that we were looking at. And if you can see this, I'm going to say we need to take it with a grain of salt. Firstly, we need to take it with a grain of salt. If I am a Democrat or a Republican, whoever's in the presidency is going to probably control the narrative a little bit. I said it, it's very real. And so this information is probably going to be skewed a little bit either way. But if I look at this, here we are, guys, like we're pretty much in line right here. And when we look at this is what's important. It says this week will feature a substantial amount of economic data, including reports on jobs, PCE, inflation, home prices, and pending home sales. And what he knows is how closely these numbers can affect our daily lives and decisions. It's important to remember that at any moment, a headliner could emerge that might shift the bond market for better or worse. Now, the jobless claim data has held up well for the first 4 months for 2025, but certain economists and some Fed presidents are expecting the hard data to get worse during the summer months, and we're waiting to see what can happen. Despite the lack of economic data and some indicators showing that people making purchases before the tariffs are imposed, observing how the bond market responds to each report. So what this is saying is this: we're no longer looking at inflation data for the most part. Like, inflation data has been flat now. Some weird stuff could happen with some tariff. We get that. We're also seeing that we didn't lose a lot of jobs. The jobless claims are pretty much flat, like they are going to ebb and flow. And so jobless claims and their correlation to when we look at recessions is what's going to move the needle on what the Fed is going to do with rates, right? With the index. And so, depending on what people say, things could spiral and the numbers could shift up and down a little bit. Um, and so, to answer Linda's question real quick, right? When we start talking about months of inventory, right? Really, what we're doing is we're taking the number of total homes, right? The total amount of homes that are currently for sale. And then what we're going to do is we're going to divide that number by the amount of homes sold per month. And right, that's what it looks like. And so when we're talking about like grand scheme of things, like that's a lot of data that we would have to pull in. Like, we could pretty much go through and look at it like if we were to go into RE, Colorado specifically, and we go look in like Denver and go get that information. All it really is we're saying total amount of homes. And then from there, this is where it gets weird when we talk about buyer's market, seller's market, right? We're talking 1 to 4 months, 4 to 6 months, 6 months plus. That's kind of how we go from a seller's market to a balanced market to a buyer's market. But yet there's also a lot of motivating factors that kind of play in that even more so right now. Let's shift gears though, and let's look at this. Welcome back to the United States, everyone. Like, this is what we want to see. This actually feels pretty good, right? When we look at this, this is, well, this is first world country. And what I mean by that for my people that are just playing along is when we look at like this, or even 2 year data, because it gets even scarier. And think about this. This is over 2 years. So these lines are way more sharp than what they really show. This gives people uncertainty. What are rates going to do when I finally find a house? What are rates going to do if I go to sell my house and then I become a buyer? What's rates going to look like tomorrow? I won't be able to afford the same size house today because rates could spiral out of control. Most sellers become buyers. This is why we saw a lot of people hold back on throwing inventory on the market, because they didn't know what they would be able to afford as homes are sitting on the market longer, right? 30 days, 60 days, 90 days on market. And they're like, oh my God, well, I can't lock in until I find a house. And I need my home to sell first. And so with stuff like this happening, this was scaring people. This is what gives people some certainty. And to Logan's point with what he made is what the headlines do. Headlines could make these bounce a little bit, but yet this makes people feel pretty good, guys. Like, over 3 months, it's kind of changed a little bit. We had this little bit of a lull, but then it just came back up to where it really was. And this is also why we can't time the market, because there is really nothing that's going on. And when we have a very vocal Fed right now, we have a very vocal president right now. We have a lot of very vocal people and information being able to be disseminated very quickly through social media channels and YouTube and the news, and they all have their own different narratives, that these numbers can change pretty quickly. But if we can get to a point where this stays pretty flat, I promise you, your guys' clients are going to come out and be way more comfortable at looking, because I don't think that we're running into an issue where people are saying, oh, you know what, 6.5 is too much. I think a lot of people are realizing that this 6.5 to 6% range is probably where we're going to live for a very long time. And there's a lot of smart people out there, these economists, that believe that we're going to end at 5.5. And that's just where we're going to live for pretty much for, I'm going to say forever going forward, even though we know forever is not real. And yet, when we look at this, this is what is going to make people more comfortable in the home buying and selling journey, is when this line flattens out and they know what rates are today and their crystal ball lines up for 30 days from now, because we're not saying huge fluctuation. This is what scares people, right? Like 7%, 6.8, we're back up to 7.7, right? Like when it gets ebbing and flowing, then we had this huge drop, but then it started increasing. Like, this is what scares people away from buying houses. This is what gives us comfort, and we can sleep at night knowing what rates are doing. But let's look at it. Altos data, A2, where the brokerage is located. Your median list price 767, and your average days on 60 is 64 versus 35, right? We look at this thing and median list price 700. So if we're coming through, new listings are hitting the market at $700,000, which has come down. And we look at this, guys, like if we're going through here, we're thinking that 46% of all homes in A2 are taking a price decrease, well above the national average. And when we're doing this, this is the difference, right? We're having homes, this average, right? We take all the houses on the market and we divide it by their total, and we figure out what the average amount of days on market is, right? So total divided by the total gives us the average. Where we have median, where we're removing all the outliers, the ones that sold in a weekend versus the one that took 100 days, and we're figuring out what that middle number is, and that's 35. Well, if we're looking at this, what this is telling me is if we don't price the home correctly, we might be on the market almost double, and we're still have a 46% chance of taking a price decrease. When we're sitting down with our sellers at the dining room table, having a conversation on what the strategy is to get their home sold for the most amount of money in the least amount of time, and figuring out what their motivations are, this is the kind of data that we need to bring with us. They were saying homes that aren't priced right actually sit on the market an extra month. And on top of an extra month, we're actually seeing that 46% of all homes that actually hit the MLS are taking a price decrease. So let's look around. Let's see what homes are in your area that are going to be competing against you for mind share from the buyers. And let's figure out how to strategically price your home so we get more people to look at it, and let's get your home sold quicker so we're not paying extra bills. We don't have to pay extra taxes. We don't have to pay an extra month on the mortgage, right? We go through and we think about this. Relisted, 4%. 4% of homes fell out of contract and got relisted. And also, guys, look at this. 0% price increases. Like, we're seeing this. We're seeing builders not build. Yes, it looks like they're building. It feels like they're building because we can see it. And yet they're slowing down production to protect their profitability. They are not going to flood the market. There's too much inventory hitting the market. They are not going to be caught holding the bag. And then we can see we're giving it a market action score of 47, which means we're still in the seller's market, just like all of Colorado and most of the nation. It's not a very high seller's market, but according to Altos, they're giving it 100 seller, 0 buyer, and they're saying 30 turns into a balance. So their score, they're saying we're about almost 20 basis points, right? We're almost 20 points higher than where we would be if we were to fall into a buyer's market.